Perfect. Call this meeting to order. First order of business is the October 24th, 2022 minutes. Is there a motion to approve? Jennifer, second by Brian. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. Reports, we'll just receive and file those unless there's any questions to those. Seeing none, receive and file. We have two zoning cases. First case is ZBA 2022-0046, petition of Peoria County. Is there a motion to put this on the floor? Matt and Sharon. Andrew?
Thank you. All right, so this is ZBA 2022-0046, which is a text amendment to Chapter 20 of our Unified Development Ordinance, which is the zoning regulations. In your packets, you'll find the actual text amendment. Anything that has a strike-through is being removed from the ordinance. Anything that has an underline is being added to the ordinance. The articles in question here today are Article 5, which covers the use regulations, Article 7, which covers the general development standards. Within Article 7, we have parking and loading requirements, and then Article 11, definitions. The intent of the proposed amendments is to clarify some language that has existed for quite some time. In some cases, it is separating uses. In other cases, it's adding uses that were maybe previously defined, but it takes some interpretation out of what we have in our ordinance and gives a more clear path and direction to both the county who's implementing the ordinance regulations and the public who's trying to understand what those regulations are used for. So what's being updated are the, first we have a definition being added for a health club or fitness center. It's actually a use that's been in our ordinance, but surprisingly is not defined. Then we are separating public and private from recreational area or facility. We currently have those as uses, but they're defined as one. So for clarification, for simplicity, we're creating a new definition that really drives the path as to what each one is classified as. We are proposing to add event centers as a use regulation in particular zoning districts, adding then a definition and then the parking and loading requirements. And we are proposing to add indoor shooting ranges. Again, the use regulation, the definition, and then the parking requirements. This text, I understand it's small on your screen. It is included in your packet. It just identifies what those definitions are. Again, there's no update to the use regulation. Health clubs or fitness centers are still permitted or special uses in the same zoning districts. And then public recreation area or facility and private recreation area or facility are still going to be permitted or special uses in the same zoning districts. We're just clarifying those definitions. To emphasize the difference between public and private, public is operated by a government agency, whereas private is operated as a business or by a private entity. One of the new proposals is for event centers. Over the last couple of years, there's been some pretty high demand, or at least inquiries, as to where can we put these event centers. We want to have outdoor weddings. We want to have a facility where we can host gatherings or parties. One of the main reasons for these amendments is it was kind of vague. Did it fit here? Did it fit there? And ultimately it didn't. And so based on the demand of calls, we're proposing to add a use regulation, a definition, and then parking requirements. So I will read this. An event center is an establishment intended to be rented by an individual or groups for private functions or events, including those operated primarily for commercial purposes. Such uses include, but are not limited to, banquets, weddings, conferences, business meetings, or other similar events. Event centers shall not include overnight accommodations on the parcel. So right now, we don't have this use. So those folks that have called and said, hey, I want to do this on my property, we've had to turn them down, and it's led to them perhaps opening their operations in different municipalities or even different counties. We are proposing to allow these as permitted uses in the C1 and C2 zoning districts, and as a special use in the A2 zoning district. And then if it exceeds 5,000 square feet, it would be a special use in the C1 or C2 zoning district. The proposed parking requirement would be 1 per 100 square feet of event space. These parking requirements are in line, as well as the proposed zoning districts, in line with what we have for clubs and lodges. You might be familiar with like an I2 society or a VFW, where you say, hey, they can already have weddings there. They already have some of these events there. It's not necessarily substantially different in that those are allowed in those locations, so we're proposing to keep them in the same zoning classifications, but then add it as a special use in the ag district where people want to take advantage of those trees and that nature setting. Indoor shooting ranges are something that we've also had some calls about, so we've added a use regulation there, a definition, and a parking requirement. And this is a facility designed or used for the safe shooting of firearms and archery equipment at targets, and which is completely enclosed within a building or structure. There already are uses in ordinances in local municipalities. You'll find that the city of Peoria has one of these on the north side of town. You'll find that Tazewell County has some in their unincorporated areas, and the village of Morton has an indoor shooting range. And so to be consistent with those other municipalities, we are proposing to add this as a special use in the industrial districts. It's consistent with the look and feel of those types of buildings, where generally they're somewhat of just a box, very plain looking, not to necessarily attract any attention to it, but they fit well in those industrial areas, out of sight, out of mind from residential uses. And the proposed parking requirement is 1 per shooting stall plus 1 employee for shift. So how did we come up with some of this stuff? There is a development definitions book that's published by the Center for Urban Policy Research. That's one of the guides that we would use as planners in our planning and zoning department. We've looked at Tazewell, Woodford, McLean, Sangamon, and Champaign counties to see what their local ordinances had. We've looked at City of Peoria, East Peoria, Washington, Morton, Bloomington, Normal, Springfield, and Champaign to see what their ordinances had. And then we had conversations with all of them. What works, what doesn't work, what would you have done different? And this is ultimately what we felt was the best proposal to move forward with for unincorporated Peoria County. So if you do have any questions, I'm happy to entertain those. Kathy Urban, our director, is also in attendance.
Brian?
I'm assuming all the water and septic requirements follow along with what we're pursuing as well, right?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Anything that is necessarily either permitted or special use will
Right.
still go through our building permit
Yeah.
process, in which there's the review for the environmental components through the
Yeah.
Peoria City County Health Department, or the documentation for
Yeah.
public or sewer or water.
Because that was a real big item on the one that they wanted to build out there off of 150. Was that on Ford Road, or what road was that?
That was off of Ford Road.
Off of Ford Road. If there just
But that
wasn't
would
any,
be certainly part of the consideration.
There wasn't
in
any
the
water
staff
there.
review, and then
Right.
ultimately the
but they were able to land downtown now, and so where the people were able to land their business downtown.
I don't know that.
Which is a
I
good
know they're
thing.
not on Ford Road.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this something you review annually?
I would say even more current or even more concurrently than that.
Okay.
The department is constantly listening to what people are asking, and so we're keeping notes, and we're looking at what the demand is for certain items. It might be something that warrants moving forward at a faster pace. It might be something where we kind of put it on the hold until we have a series of amendments.
Okay.
I believe this is probably the second or third amendment that we brought to you in 2022. We felt that this one was a little bit more necessary, perhaps, than some others at times.
I guess you just answered my question, because I wondered if what brought the changes about. Was there specific property that inquiry about a specific property, or
I would say there's several
Okay.
properties that have inquired about event centers.
Okay.
And so we've had to essentially turn them away until we could get an amendment in place.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is it appropriate to then follow up with them to let them know if these changes are made moving forward? Do you have a contact for those that have been in touch most recently?
Yeah, absolutely. Either an applicant, petitioner, property owner, realtors even we've worked with on these types of uses and locations to make sure that if they have someone looking, they know when and where it will be appropriate to come back. So if the right, so if the county's ordinance doesn't permit it as a use, either a permitted use or a special use, that means that it's not allowed in Peoria County. And so when somebody calls and says, I'd like to have weddings out at my property, and we say, we don't have a use for this. You know, we're in the middle or we're working towards getting that added to our ordinance. But unfortunately, at this time, you cannot do that in unincorporated Peoria County. That has been a conversation that we've had to have in the last year or two about certain types of uses. And that's one of the reasons why these ones are coming forward maybe a little bit more swiftly than others at times.
Ms. Williams?
Just to follow up on what Jennifer asked, do you follow up with specific organizations like the Association of Realtors, maybe a builders associations, that sort of thing, just to let them know these changes are happening?
In the past we have, depending on what the change might have been. Certainly word of mouth kind of travels amongst the realtors when they're looking for these event center type spaces. We can do that.
So I would just say, from in conversations with Kathy and Andrew, maybe in the past this was something that would come across every once in a while. But as you've seen, there's been way more desire for event centers, especially some maybe rural settings or barn-style weddings, that we really thought that this was something and the right opportunity to take an address at it. If you recall, indoor shooting range, we never really defined that either. So since we were opening this up, looking at event centers, venues, that it'd be appropriate to really clearly define some definitions. So comes to mind one example here recently that this was, and so we really felt that it was sooner than later. Staff did a phenomenal job as always doing their research. This has been in the work for probably a couple months now. And like everything we do, nothing takes lightly. So I do appreciate staff looking into this and bringing this forward to make Peoria County more business friendly. Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Ayes have it. So this, being that this is a change, instead of probably just something briefly at the board, we'll probably have this presentation again for the board, so the whole board understands it. Next up is ZBA 2022-0049, petition of Michael P. Cochran. Is there a motion to put this on the floor? Mr. Watkins, Ms. Williams. Kathy?
Yes. Hi, this is a special use for a proposed land split in the A2 agricultural district. The petitioner is proposing to split two existing parcels of approximately 30.5 acres total and a portion of another into 6 proposed 5-acre tracts. The parcels are located on West Legion Hall Road at North Evans Mill Road in Radnor Township. The subject parcels and all parcels to the south, east, and west are zoned A2 agricultural. To the north, the parcels are zoned A1 ag preservation. The subject parcels to be divided consist of 2 small agricultural fields totaling approximately 10 acres in total, timber, a creek, grassland, and an outbuilding. Surrounding land uses include row crop production, timber, single-family dwellings. There are 7 parcels ranging from 1.85 to 5 acres within 2,500 feet of the subject site. There are 4 single-family dwellings within 100 feet. The petitioner's request is consistent with the surrounding residential density and parcel size. A LISA was conducted at this project site. The overall score was 207 out of 300, which is a medium rating for agricultural production. The 6 proposed tracks would utilize both private wells and private septic systems. New wells were drilled on each of the 2 parent parcels as part of the special use request. The petitioner did submit a well construction report for each well, and both wells meet or exceed the minimum of 3 gallons per minute. The Peoria City County Health Department currently has no objections to the land split. The petitioner did submit an IDNR EcoCat report, which indicated that there is no record of endangered species or protected sites in the project's vicinity. We had no comments from the Radnor Township Road Commissioner. However, the addition of 6 potential dwellings should create minimal impact on Legion Hall Road and North Evansville Road. The County Comprehensive Land Use Plan designates this area as agriculture. The plan states that given that these areas are less agriculturally productive than the Ag Preservation Land Use Form, there is more allowance for growth and development. The plan also states that residential uses should reflect the ag nature of the area by locating on large lots. The petitioner's proposal is to divide the subject parcel into 6 lots of approximately 5 acres each. The request is consistent with the Comprehensive Land Use Plan. We did have 5 objections for this case. No consents were on file. 2 of the objections were signed by the same person, Tim Wagenbach, one as himself personally and one for his business, Akron Services. Tim's concerns were that there may be neighbors complaining about grain dust and truck traffic from his adjacent small grain operation. He would also personally prefer less people in the neighborhood and traffic. He also mentioned that this would diminish the influence of agriculture and decrease security of his family. As president of Akron Services, Inc., again, he was concerned that new neighbors that were unfamiliar with agriculture would complain about the ag activity in the area. Todd Dittmer spoke at the hearing. He lives east of the property and farms 25 acres there. He's concerned with his property values and thinks zoning should protect the predictability of surrounding land uses. Dennis Belcher also spoke at the hearing. He said there is a current outbuilding on the subject property, and he's concerned about the care of any new parcels. He lives a quarter mile northwest of this property. And Steve Maxwell is an adjacent owner. He is concerned about erosion and drainage and the care of the new parcels. The petitioner did speak following Mr. Maxwell's concerns and stated that there is a drainage ditch in the timber and that parcel setbacks have been placed so that homes could be located away from the drainage ditch. Staff did recommend approval with the restriction in your staff report. That's our normal special use ag split restriction that the parcel not be divided again unless subsequently rezoned. And the zoning board recommended approval with that same restriction unanimously.
Thank you, Kathy. We do have the petitioner here and one of the objectors, Mr. Maxwell. I will give them time if they would like, but then first off, I'd like to see if there's any questions from the board before I would grant them the privilege of the floor.
Where is the elevator from there? Is it off the screen?
It's right over on the other side. See where that outbuilding is? Basically directly across. A little farther down. And that's Mr. Maxwell's property right there. Yeah. And then Mr. Wagenbach's property is directly across where the grain bins were. Any other questions before I would let them talk? And that both told them, but for the record, during both of their speeches, the only thing that can be taken into consideration by this board was testimony that was given at the ZBA. Anything that was not presented there would be considered new evidence that we are not allowed to hear since the ZBA is the fact-finding board. So I don't know which gentleman would prefer to go first. Mr. Maxwell? If you
I would like to highlight my presentation on this. My wife and I live on the corner of Legion Hall and Evansville.
Mr. Maxwell, can I do ask you to use because it is being recorded, so that way that,
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep.
For the benefit of the committee, I would like to highlight my presentations from the prior hearing. My wife and I live on the corner of Legion Hall Road and Evans Mill Road. My family's occupied that property for 50 years. The questioning lands border us on the east and the south. The consistent mismanagement and neglect of these properties in this case makes me certain that the subdivision would not be in the interest of good land management practices. The field immediately east of my property is the one that was highlighted in the erosion problems. Every year there's a ditch at least 3 feet deep that goes right down through the middle of that. That ditch was so severe in 2021 that the corn was not able to be harvested from that field and is still standing. I submitted a photograph showing that fact. I also submitted pictures of the ditch from early May where they were at least 3 feet deep. The ground to the south of my property across the creek contains so many seeps and springs due to the nature of the unique hydrology in this area that I don't think you could use it for anything constructive. You would have to fence it to even make pasture use of it, to keep the animals out of the seeps. The neighbor, Mr. Coulter, across the road from that part of the property can't even mow his property down the hill because of the continuing nature of the seeps in that area. In case it was not clearly mentioned before, Sally and Osama Akhladias, who are co-petitioners in this, were forced into this because I mentioned this in because Mr. Mario Miranda, when he made that little keyhole-shaped property, left a septic tank and a propane tank off the property. And they have to, in order to get it back without, he's making them file alongside of him. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
questions for Mr. Maxwell? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Mr. Cochran?
Good afternoon. Name's Michael Cochran. I'm with Austin Engineering, and I am the petitioner, and I represent the owner of this property in this matter. Just to briefly reiterate everything that has been going on here, we are submitting a petition to subdivide this tract into 6 parcels of 5 acres or more in size. Everything will be a minimum of 5 acres. And to specifically address some of the concerns, especially those concerns regarding drainage and erosion and everything else, we did submit, along with our package, a series of soils reports that were also submitted to the health department that classified the soils, determined how they, well suited they were for this type of development, and there were no issues with those soil samples that were performed by our soils engineer. Additionally, we have placed adequate setbacks away from the main drainage ditch to ensure that no one would be able to build in those drainage ditch areas or cause themselves any problems with that. Also here to answer any technical questions that people may have regarding the lot layout or the subdivision or anything of that nature.
Any questions from the petitioner? Seeing none, is there any other questions for staff before I call a vote? Mr. Elsesser?
I have a few comments because we farm just up the road from there, so I go by there all the time, and I've spoken with some of those who have objected to this land split, and the thing that is concerning to me is the people that own this, and it's been brought out in the testimony, in my estimation, have not taken very good care of it. I mean, when you sell off a parcel, and you don't even include the septic tank and the propane tank in it, I mean, that's just complete carelessness. And then when you see the outbuilding, and I think that Mr. Maxwell brought that up in the ZBA as well. I mean, it's just gone to pieces. It hasn't been taken care of, and so my question would be is how well will those who come in there and purchase the property, how well will they take care of it? You know, will they be good neighbors and different things like that? Because I just feel like that there's been a lot of neglect there. And with regard to the drainage, the soils are fine as far as, you know, building houses there. That's not an issue, but there's a huge drainage, huge rut, you know, right along the timber. And so, you know, if I was a landowner and a farmer, I would have corrected that a long time ago instead of just letting the water run down through there, you know, right next to the ditch, you know, where there's actually a new ditch in the field. So I'm going to have to oppose this because these are my constituents, and I share some of the same concerns that they do.
Thank you, Mr. Elsasser. Jennifer?
Kathy, would you say the efforts to mitigate the erosion concern have been taken care of with their efforts, in your opinion?
Prior to this testimony, we were never made aware of any erosion concerns. It's not because of any kind of building or construction, so it's not something that our department would be involved in. Because they're not planning on putting any roads in, you know, there won't be required road construction or erosion control construction plans as far as subdividing it. They're all going to access an existing road. When they are ready to build houses, they will need to acquire an erosion control permit at that time, and we'll monitor the erosion control during the housing construction.
So like, is what I see though is mostly like the elevator. So how on like I mean, this is fine. You can do what you want with your property, but how do we protect the people that are already existing around there when we get complaints with the elevator, the traffic, the roads? Is there a way to protect ourselves towards that if future two houses are there? Calling, complaining about the dirt blowing across and...
Right. So we don't have any, there wouldn't be a violation from trucks running up and down the road as long as, you know, they're allowed to be on that road for weight requirements. Right. I mean, when they're, yeah, I mean, the elevators are there, you know, they're going to see it if they're interested in purchasing a lot, but there would not be a violation. You know, we would just explain to them that there isn't a violation there. Agriculture is a permitted use in the county, and yeah, so there wouldn't be a violation that would fall into place.
Mr. Elsasser?
I think what Matt is referring to is, you know, like during the fall, there's a lot of red dog from the corn that's, if you get a strong wind, it'll be blowing across the road and, you know, into their lots or whatever. And then the dryers, they're pretty loud. I mean, they'll be humming all night long, 24 hours a day for about 2 months straight. So hopefully people will understand that they're moving out into the country.
I think that was Mr. Wagenbach's letter of concern. But it is clear if you are purchasing one of those properties you're not going to miss those grain elevators that are directly across the street. Ms. Williams?
Thank you. So there's two things that I have concern about on this. Obviously, the erosion problems that have been mentioned. But the most important to me is in the report, it says there's cause for concern regarding high water tables in the on-site wastewater systems that could be there. So I see a potential environmental impact there. I'm really concerned about this, so at this time I'm going to be a no vote.
Mr. Elsasser?
I think that was mentioned by Mr. Maxwell as far as the underground springs, I think that are coming up, and could I ask the engineer if he's aware of that, or
Yeah,
is that
sure, Mr.
appropriate?
Cochran.
About the underground springs, or the,
Yes, I'm aware, and that's why we, as a part of our report to submit to the health department, we do have to have those soils tests and soil classifications done, and we hire a soils engineer to come in and do that. He did make us aware of that, and we identified the areas where those were at, and then we placed the things on our plan to stay away from those areas. So anything, and the only area of concern that that's referring to is just on, I believe that's tract M4, and that would be close to where the drainage ditch is at. Otherwise, all the other soils reports came back clear, and there were no issues with the groundwater. It was just an area within tract M4, which I believe we addressed with the soils engineer and included in our reports to the county.
what about the, when you're driving along the road and right where you start to drive up the lane, there's obviously a ditch with, woods and trees and different things, but right next to that, out in the bean field, there's a huge, it's probably 2.5 or 3 feet deep. You could call it a ditch or whatever you want to call it. It's evolved from the erosion, which hasn't been taken care of. I mean, that's a concern.
Sure, and it may be a concern, and that may have to do with the way the current owner has managed it, but that should not be indicative of the way a future owner would manage it, especially if they're building a house. I would say that they're more than likely to take better care of and protect their investment than somebody who's an absent property owner who's not there every day.
But in the farming world, the only way to take care of that is if and Mr. Rickard would know what this means. It's called a drag line, and you would go through there and you would create a new ditch, and with grass on the sides, and it'd be very expensive now. I mean, 20 years ago it wouldn't have cost much to do it, but it'd be very expensive to do something like that. So it's just kind of disappointing to me that he hasn't addressed those issues before now.
Before we going too far off in different things, we need to stay focused on the fact of whether or not this landowner has the right to split the property into the divisions, because everything else would be hypotheticals. Plus, the landowner still would have to sell these lots to have somebody purchase them to be built on. So, just a reminder that this was approved by Planning and Zoning, and this passed the ZBA at 7-0 unanimously for fact findings. For this board to overturn that, the members that would vote no would have to have findings of fact that would support actually denying this landowner their right to divide it. Any other questions? Mr. Ricker? You can if there was findings of new fact, but I don't see that there's new findings of fact according. No, you have to. You have to give the petitioner their due process, and so unless there was something there and they were willing to take it back, they've already passed through the ZBA at a 7-0 vote. So there's nothing to send it back for them to review that would change that. And if you keep sending it back or deny it, then there's legalities in denying due process. Correct.
You can only consider the evidence that came out at the ZBA, so it wouldn't be an issue of new facts coming to light that would be sending it back down to the ZBA. It would just be, at this point, your role is to either approve it or deny it. The petition, based on the facts that came out at the ZBA, which you have through the minutes. Does that answer was that the question? I mean, does that help? Okay.
Questions left? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? So 4 ayes and 2 nays. Motion passed. Anything for miscellaneous? Well, seeing that this is the last committee of land use, I appreciate everything that you've done as this current makeup for the last 2 years. I know that we've had amount of solar cases and Airbnbs, and sometimes our meetings last 5 minutes, and other times they can last well over an hour. I appreciate all the time and effort and research that everybody put into this to make this a great committee the last 2 years. So thank you for your time and effort. Appreciate it as being the chairman of this committee.